In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We've all been going to church for a long time now, for many years, I'm sure. And so we know how our service normally goes. Part of that service is, of course, the time when we read from the Bible to one another. Sometimes we read from the Old Testament, and sometimes we read aloud from the epistles, and sometimes we read from one of the four Gospels. And then normally there's a short time after the readings in which someone stands up, either a clergy person like myself or a lay person, and talks about the reading that was appointed for that day, at least one of them, and tries to help us all see if there is in fact a connection between the story, oftentimes about something that happened long ago and far away, a connection between that story and the lives that we are all living on a normal basis, a regular basis, day in and day out. It's always a challenging thing, both for the person that's doing the talking and the thinking out loud, and for the people in the pew, to try to make that connection. But it seems to me that it is worth a whole lot of effort to try to succeed in that. So this morning I want to do my part and ask you to think along with me about this particular gospel reading, which Carmen just read for us so well, the reading about the coming of the Son of Man. It's taken from Matthew's gospel, as we heard, and from a section of that gospel which is concerned with the day of the Lord, the coming of the risen Christ again. It is a story which paints a vivid picture of the sudden and the surprising and in some ways shocking reappearance of the risen Christ. And the reading talks about a day when the risen Christ will return at long last, but not this time meek and mild as he may well have been at some points in his life. But this time he returns full of a huge power and invincible might. It's about the day when he will gather up all of his people and wipe away the tears from their eyes and bind up all the wounds that they have collected over the course of their lifetime and wash away the sea of their sufferings. And heaven only knows, those early brothers and sisters of ours a long time ago lived in a world that we can scarcely imagine. In any event, that day, the day when the risen Christ suddenly reappears, suddenly returns, is going to be a day when the old world dies, disappears, and a new world is born. And perhaps most importantly of all, but certainly disturbing, it will also be a day when the sheep will be separated from the goats. It will be a day for reckoning for all the human creatures. We oftentimes talk about it as the day of judgment. It's an image that is in the readings for today, in our collect, and in our prayers in the course of our service today. So, one big question that I want to raise for us this morning is whether or not we are able to see any connection between this story about the return of the risen Christ and our own life. Is there any meaning we can gather from it? And I hope that we will be able to see something that is helpful to us and perhaps change the way we think about ourselves and our own futures. One way to begin is to stop and think for a moment about our own lives, your life, the life that you have lived up to this point. And think about the things that have happened to you. Some of them sad, some of them happy, Think about the things done and left undone, the good things and the not so good things, the things said and left unsaid, all the things that make up your past. And then you might go a little bit further and think of these things as happenings, as it were, that have taken place while you were on this journey through life, on a journey down a river, a powerful, deep, strong river. You might call it the river of life. Our journey down this river, to follow the metaphor, our journey down this river began when we were born, when we first saw the light of day. And we've been in this river now for a long time. Some of us have been in here for 70, 80 years, some 25, 20, still a long time. We've been in this river, and we've been carried along many a mile, many a year. And when we look backwards, imagine this, if you're in the river and you look backwards, back upstream, which would be towards your past. You know, most of the images that we can conjure up are real. We say, oh yeah, that's the way it was. I remember that. That's exactly what happened. But when we turn and look downstream toward the future, things don't look quite so clear, do they? For me, when I look to the future, it's a very vague thing, full of hopes, full of fears, but nevertheless vague. And sometimes looking to the future, we begin to wonder, you know, where is this river going to carry us? What is going to become of me? What lies ahead of me beyond the next bend? Where am I going to end up? One deep purpose of this particular reading from Matthew's Gospel today is to give two questions like that, anxious questions, a little bit tough, to give two questions like this an answer. Sometimes the answer is not pleasant, but it is nevertheless, in our tradition, it is certain that in our way of looking at things, the Christian community's way of looking at things, that at the end of the river, the river of life, it's going to bear us all, you and me without exception, all of us, to exactly the same place. And that place is, of course, before the face, as it were, of the one who made us and sent us into this world in the first place. The river is going to carry us back to the source from which we first sprung. And there, standing, as it were, face to face with the one who gave us life in the very beginning, whether we are ready or not, whether we are prepared or not, whether we like it or not, whether we think it's fair or not, nevertheless, the river is going to bear us to a point at which we will need to stand as a responsible person before our Maker and give an account of the way in which we have lived, and give an account of the way in which our lives have turned out, insofar as the decisions we made and the kind of person that we have become over the course of our life, how we've used the precious years that have been given to us. Give an account of the kind of self that we have become. Now, if we credit, going further, if we credit the famous parable of the Last Judgment, which is, in fact, one of Matthew's strongest parables, and it is placed in his gospel just a few verses after our reading for today. It's the famous parable of the separation of the sheep from the goats. And the matter at hand in this accounting is very straightforward. And the matter can be, I think, put this way. It's a thorny matter, but it has to do, the accounting has to do with how we have treated our fellow travelers along the way. how we have treated our companions on the way, our fellow human beings. And of special importance, again listening to that parable, of special importance is the matter of how we've treated those people who, in our culture, are seen as people of no special importance. We know who they are. There's people who are weak, people who are unable to make a go of it in life. We say weak, as it were, unable to make a go of it in life. People who have nothing, people who have no roof over their head, no food in their stomach. People who have nothing to live for in the sense that most of us do. So that is the matter that lies at the heart of the account which you and I are bound to give, as I say, whether we want to or not. And I hasten to say that this is not my idea. This is not any preacher's idea. It's not the idea of a bleeding heart liberal, as they say. It's not the idea of a New Age philosopher. It's not the idea of someone we might disparagingly call a do-gooder. No, this idea springs from the source itself, from the one before whom we are going to stand on our journey through life, through this world. When it's done, it's the teaching of the one that we call Lord every single Sunday that we are in here. And it's, as it were, the teaching of the one we all have on our foreheads, invisibly embedded in our foreheads, the sign of the cross, the teaching of the one that we follow as Christians. So this teaching about the accounting and the seriousness of the matter of how we treat one another and how we have treated one another is a teaching that has risen out of the word of the one who has made heaven and earth. So it is not to be trifled with, and it is not to be laughed off. This teaching is as deeply embedded in the fabric of the universe as the law of gravity is. So the relevance of the teaching, it seems to me, that's embedded in our gospel reading this morning is simply that we are all bound. We are all bound to give an account for the way in which we have lived. And this is a certainty. But when we are to give this account is, of course, uncertain. We all know that there have been plenty of people in the world who have gone up on the mountain and said the world's going to end on such and such a day and such a time, and then they come down off the mountain, the world's still there. And so oftentimes we think, well, perhaps there is some misunderstanding here. But one way to think about it, to think about the end of the world, to think about the second coming, to think about the day of the Lord, is to think about the fact that no man knows when the last beat of his heart is going to be. No woman knows which breath is going to be her last breath. No human being knows when the end will come for them, when their heart no longer beats, when their breath is no longer there. And one thought you might ponder is that perhaps that is when the second coming happens. That is when the Son of Man appears. That is when the risen Christ appears, so to speak, returns face to face with us when we have been washed up on the far shore and left our wonderful bodies behind. So that perhaps for some of our fellow human beings, on this planet, their heart will beat its last, and they'll draw their last breath in just a minute from now. Somewhere in the world that's going to happen. And when that happens for that person, then the Son of Man has appeared. And in that time, it is time for an accounting. Or the day of the Lord will come for some of us in this world in an hour, in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. In any event, for all of us, the time remaining on our journey through this world is finite. The river is running to the sea. We are in the river. And no one can stay in this river forever. No heart beats forever. So if we ask ourselves, what are we supposed to do with all this? How is our life meant to be different? We could think about it this way. We could make up our mind to start with that we are going to let this teaching become embedded in our hearts and in our minds. And we can make up our minds and set our hearts on trying to prepare ourselves for what is bound to come. Try to be ready for what awaits us. And we might even surrender. Feature this. We might even surrender ourselves to the truth that, like it or not, we are going to return to the source. We are going to return to the one who made us. And we could begin to try to live out the time that we have remaining, however much time it is, holding the truth of the accounting that is to be in our hearts and holding it, as it were, before our mind's eye on a daily basis. And we could decide that from this day forth, we will try as best we possibly can to pay serious attention to the human beings that are on this journey with us, who are in this river with us. And we can say and we can strive not to treat our fellow human beings as things, as objects. We can decide that we won't speak of them, we won't speak of anybody as if they were nobodies. We won't speak to another person as if he or she is a nobody. And we won't always be thinking that we are the most important people in the world and the satisfaction of our own needs is the most important item on the agenda. We could give that up. And we could look for the opportunity, again, on a daily basis. We could look for the opportunity, to make a difference, much for the better, in the lives of the people that we share this planet with. And last of all, we can pray for this strength. We can pray for this strength to practice the loving kindness of which we have spoken so many times in this parish family. It takes strength. It takes courage. It takes endurance to be able to practice, to do the simple thing of practicing loving kindness. But we can pray for it. And the good news about that is that all the saints, virtually all of them from the beginning, have said plainly that God hears these prayers, and he does in fact give the strength that we need to do the work, to practice the loving kindness. So for my own part, I'm trying really hard these days to trust the saints on this and to practice and to ask for the strength. And I hope that you will also find it in your heart to say those prayers. And I feel certain that when you do, you will find the strength that you need. Amen.